people, the headlines, the issues impacting you and your family. This Week in Cincinnati on WCPO 9.
Welcome to This Week in Cincinnati. I'm Tanya O'Rourke. 3 members of Cincinnati City Council have now been indicted by federal authorities. The latest is P.G. Sittenfeld. He was accused of bribery on Thursday. This comes a week after Jeff Pastor was indicted and Tamaya Denard's guilty plea this summer. U.S. Attorney David DeVillers says Sittenfeld took $40,000. That in exchange for his votes on a development project. Authorities say the money was put into a political action committee that Sittenfeld controlled. Sittenfeld is running for mayor. The indictment includes recorded conversations between Sittenfeld and a cooperating witness, former Bengal Chinadum Ndukwe. Sittenfeld is pleading not guilty. Mayor John Cranley says he should resign from council.
Tamaya and Jeff's case, at least part of it was desperation for cash. In this case, it seems to be to accumulate power for power's sake. And so, in many ways, that's worse.
Pastor's accused of taking $55,000 in bribes for his votes on development projects. Former council member Tamaya Denard will be sentenced this month. She took $15,000 in exchange for her votes on development projects. David DeVillers says there's a culture of corruption at City Hall. This week, Councilmember Betsy Sunderman and Greg Landsman both proposed reforms to clean up City Hall. Both plans call for a charter amendment which would allow for the recall of elected officials. Sunderman also wants to suspend a council member from casting votes or proposing legislation if charged with a felony involving their duties on council.
The people of Cincinnati need to know that we won't sit by and let corruption consume our city.
Sunderman would also require convicted council members to pay restitution to the city for the crimes committed against the city. On Tuesday, before the Sittenfeld indictment was announced, WCPO 9 News anchor Evan Millward spoke with Landsman about his proposal to change City Hall.
Councilmember Greg Landsman's joining us now to talk about his proposals. Your proposals go a little bit beyond what your co-council member Betsy Sunderman proposed this week as well. First question I have for you, though, is I'm curious as to sort of what the mood is in City Hall. I know this came as a surprise to a number of people, but does this engender suspicion amongst you guys? I know you all talk frequently. You have to. Do you kind of giving people a second glance now? What's going on at City Hall?
Well, at the moment, City Hall is shut down because of the pandemic. And so we're not seeing each other as much as we usually do. I can only speak for myself, and that is to say I feel much more committed to trying to do everything I can to restore public trust in what we do. And part of that includes the reforms that I put forward yesterday, and I'll ask my colleagues to vote on in the next couple of weeks. But a big piece of it is how we work together and showing folks that that we can get things done and do it collaboratively.
Well, and to that end, your plan is kind of 5 major points. You came out with, there's a charter amendment, there is a local ethics commission, a chief ethics good government officer who would kind of oversee that ethics commission. Then there's some campaign finance reforms and additional training for our public elected leaders in the city of Cincinnati. You look at this, and I'm going to have you kind of go through each one, but one of the questions I have is, and this I think has come up already this week, there seems to be a little bit of redundancy amongst what already exists at the state level, particularly with sort of the ethics commission here. What is this going to cost, and is it redundant?
So there's, in my opinion, a need for real oversight locally, in addition to what exists now in terms of the Ohio Ethics Commission. I believe Cincinnati can lead the state by providing its own ethics commission that builds on what the state does, that has local oversight over the financial disclosure forms that we send to Columbus, but nobody here looks at, and offers additional training and support to staff and elected officials, and that's where this chief ethics and good government person comes in to play. This is somebody who really owns this work and ensures that folks are well trained in all of the rules, especially if we update the campaign finance rules, which I'm proposing we do. And with technology changing, there are a lot of rules that are new. And I think it's really important for everyone to know exactly what they are, to be trained every year so that mistakes aren't made. And will it mean that this kind of corruption that we saw here and that we've seen in other cities across the state and in Columbus with Larry Householder's $60 million corruption scheme, will it preclude any of that from ever happening again? No, but I think it will help ensure that we do all of the things we need to restore public trust, which is essential for us getting our work done.
And that was something I was going to ask, was that did you think any of this would have stopped what has happened? We've seen it now twice in 1 year with former council member Tamaya Denard and now Councilman Jeff Pastor. Do you think it would have stopped it? It becomes an issue of you can't force someone not to put their hand in the cookie jar, kind of.
Well, two things. One is I think it could have the training, the oversight, the accountability could have gotten in front of some of these issues. But even if it doesn't stop all of these things, or some things are going to happen no matter what, I do think that it helps to ensure that we have a better government, a more effective government, a fairer government, a more transparent government, and all of that helps to restore public trust, which is something that we all have to work on now. I mean, this is a big deal, not just in Cincinnati, but across the state and in the country. Public trust for what we do is diminished, and it's a huge part of our ability to get things done and to attract and retain really good people.
To that end, you kind of come at this with a unique perspective, in the sense that you were involved in this Gang of Five open records violation. It cost the city $100,000, and there's no dereliction of duty found, but there's still some semblance of court action moving on this. What did you learn from this? And does this give your proposals a credibility problem at City Hall?
Yeah, so I think it actually provides more credibility because, I made a mistake. There was a text thread I was on. I shouldn't have responded at all. And I did, and it was a mistake, one that I wasn't clear was an issue. I knew that there were other issues, getting on a phone call that was problematic. I wasn't sure about the texting because we were told that texts weren't public records. And so I do think the trainings will help because it would have provided much greater clarity in terms of what is and isn't allowed. But I learned a valuable lesson. I mean, you got to be really careful, as my father always told me, find out where the line is and stay as far away as you possibly can from it. And in that case, I got too close. And so I'm determined to do everything I can to restore public trust, because even though what I was involved in was very different than these other issues, it didn't help with public trust. And public trust is a big part of public service, and I believe in public service.
Final question here, and this is a weird one, but now I feel like I have to ask this. Are you under any kind of investigation?
No.
And then when do you think you could see some movement on your reforms?
The ordinances, the laws that I'm going to put forward are being drafted now, and my hope is that when council reconvenes in a couple weeks, that we vote on them.
All right, Councilman Greg Landsman, thank you for your time and for being with us.
Thanks, Evan.
Welcome back to This Week in Cincinnati. I'm Tanya O'Rourke. The pandemic has disrupted lives in every way. And on top of that, You now have the usual stress of the holiday season, and it means these are hard times emotionally and mentally for many families. Those with children have the additional stress of helping them through all of it. For some insight into that and ideas that might just help you, I spoke on Zoom this week with the president and chief operating officer of the Lindner Center of Hope, Dr. Paul Crosby. Dr. Paul Crosby, thanks so much for being with us. Help me understand, if you can, where we are as a society from a mental health standpoint regarding COVID.
Sure. Well, so, the first thing to understand is that this pandemic, and especially the length of it and how long we've been dealing with it, is really a setup to trigger our body's anxiety system. So we have anxiety, we experience anxiety in order to help protect us from the world around us. So anxiety isn't necessarily bad, and it's not necessarily abnormal. And what anxiety does is it triggers our emotional response to some kind of threat in the moment so that we can protect ourselves and say, run away or fight something off. Anxiety is fueled by uncertainty and it's fueled by loss of control. And with this pandemic, we have a threat that we don't really know how severe it is for us personally. And it's hard to define. We don't know who has it. We don't even know if we have it, and all that fuels anxiety. And so the first point I want everybody to understand is that it's okay to not feel okay. In fact, it's pretty normal to feel some level of anxiety through all this right now.
I mean, I think everyone experiences this differently, doctor. And like, for example, I can get more emotional than I used to. And I think, is this part of what I'm dealing with? Is my anxiety acting out? And I've heard from so many parents specifically that their children are struggling so much. So what I want to know ultimately is what they should do to help, what we should be doing to help ourselves. I do yoga and I think that helps me, but what can we do to address these issues if they're small?
I think it's really important that you start with yourself. One of the first recommendations we always give is to have some kind of awareness of your own emotional reactions, and that's especially true when you're hoping to be helpful towards children, because children of all ages really look to the adults around them. And really especially look at adults' emotional responses in order to model their own behavior. So that's always the first step. For smaller kids, children are less likely to have the words to describe their feelings. So a very important thing to do is to help give children that vocabulary to describe what's going on inside of them and to model that. And it's also important to note that children are more likely to experience experience their emotional symptoms as physical symptoms. And so they'll have things like stomach aches, maybe headaches, maybe just kind of vaguely not feeling well. And it's possible that those are coming up because of emotional symptoms.
We know that
adolescents. Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. I want you to continue on that, but also we know that children are more adaptable than adults for sure. They're modeling us, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So the good news is children are very adaptable and they learn quickly, and it doesn't take a lot of setting of good examples and also just teaching about how to talk about these things before they start to pick up very well.
You were starting to talk about adolescents. What should we be looking for from signs from them? Because they're very isolated too.
Yeah, well, so they are. Well, and so that this has hit adolescents especially hard. Teenagers are in that stage of development very focused on their peers as well as on personal achievements, and the disruptions that we've seen in school, for good reason because of safety concerns, but nonetheless the disruptions have disrupted that for them. It's gotten in the way, and it's made that part of their lives seem uncertain to them. And so even more than they may be used to, we're seeing feelings of isolation, feelings of hopelessness, feelings of helplessness, and in some cases, teens start to think about suicide. We know this because there's been increased calls to the National Suicide Hotline since the pandemic. And we also know that schools have noticed an increase in the number of their pupils who end up being hospitalized for suicidal thoughts. So that's a really big thing to watch out for in teens and adolescents.
So can you quantify that for us? Because we hear that all the time. There's an uptick in suicides, not just amongst teens, amongst adults too. How much more are we seeing? Well, can you put a percentage for us?
I can't put a percentage. Our guess is that it's several times more than what is typical. We know in the data coming out of reports to the CDC that across the board for many mental illnesses and mental health symptoms like anxiety or substance use or trauma-related stress, that their reports of these symptoms are several times what they usually are for the same time of year in previous years. And so all that's felt to be because of the pandemic.
All right, this is some terrifying but important information that we're hearing from you. We're going to be back with more from the doctor, including more on what we should be doing to help ourselves and our children. We'll be right back. I'm here with Dr. Paul Crosby from the Lindner Center of Hope. And Doctor, my sister took her children recently to the pediatrician, who essentially started asking her kids questions about, are you feeling depressed? When she asked why, the doctor explained that they are seeing depression in children at an alarming rate, and that they are prescribing antidepressants for little kids at a multi-times fold rate. So is that true, number one? And what does that tell us?
Yeah, well, so yes, we've seen definitely an increase in referrals for not only depression, but many other symptoms. And it's important to note that mental illnesses by and large are very easily, not easily necessarily, but very well treated. They tend to respond very well to treatments, and sometimes that's medication, and sometimes it's talk therapy, and sometimes it's both. The important thing to know though is that treatment's available, and it's usually very well tolerated and very successful. So yeah, no, it doesn't surprise me that your sister's pediatrician mentioned that.
That is alarming to me. And while we all recognize that we need to stay safe, we need to stay distant, we need to wash our hands, wear masks, that kind of thing, are we doing in some ways more harm than good for the next generation of Americans?
This is a delicate and difficult balance to strike, I think. And I think we see our policymakers and our leaders in various spheres trying to wrestle with that and trying to come up with what works best for their community. As adults, the best thing that we can do is try to model calm, rational behavior about, keeping ourselves safe. Look, we don't necessarily understand what's going to happen next with this pandemic, but here are the things that we know we can do to keep ourselves safe: wear masks, socially distance, and to do that calmly without a lot of emotion, because then that'll help reduce anxiety for everybody around us, but especially the kids around us, and help give a context for how to move on next from that. Whatever that means. And then it makes it easier to focus on things like school and the other things that we're trying to keep up with amid all the shutdowns and obstacles that we have. So that's the best advice I can give, to a terribly complex and difficult to answer question.
There really doesn't seem to be a win in so many ways. Paul Dixon, Dr. Paul Crosby, I appreciate so much you spending time with us here on This Week in Cincinnati. We have so much more to discuss, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Thank you for doing this, Tanya.
And that is This Week in Cincinnati for this weekend. We're always updating headlines on WCPO.com and in the app. Have a great day.